We're making our way through 2 Samuel. Well, we're up to chapter 4. I don't know how fast we're going to go, but if we finish chapter 6 before the clock strikes 9:45, we're going to stop. Because chapter 7 is a very rich chapter. I know you've all been reading ahead, but I'd like you to take chapter 7 and not just read it this week, but study it. Because there is a blessing there for the nation of Israel, and there's a model prayer there for us that is just so very relevant. So that's the preview. That's your assignment. Let's get into chapter 4. We've said that the theme of this book is how the mighty have fallen, and we've seen how not so mighty men have fallen as well. Chapter 1, we see Saul and his first two sons died. He had He had a son that survived that battle, Ishbosheth, who was 40 years old. Where was Ishbosheth? The name means man of shame. And so we don't know where Ishbosheth was. We don't know where Abner was. We talked about that last couple of weeks. In chapter 2, we see that Asahel fell. He was Joab's little brother. And ultimately, Abner falls. David mourns. And we're going to see in chapter 4 the assassination of Ishbosheth and then the two men that had killed him. But we're also going to see, and this is the theme that goes throughout the book, the fall of David. And here's one of the symptoms coming up. 6 sons from 6 wives. So chapter 4, when Ishbosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his courage failed. Well, he must not have had much courage to begin with, because he would have been fighting with his 2 brothers and his dad. And all of Israel was dismayed. Keep in mind, as we read through these chapters, whenever it says the word Israel, it's talking about the 10 northern tribes. And unlike the separation of the kingdom after Solomon dies, it was not just those 10 tribes, but it also included the tribe of Benjamin. Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin. It was the tribe of Judah with David, who had been anointed in Hebron against the 11. And all Israel was dismayed. Now Saul's son had 2 men who were captains of raiding bands. The name of the one was Baanah, and the name of the other was Rechab. So there you see a son of affliction and rider, and the son of affliction is going to give some affliction to Ishbosheth. He's going to receive some affliction from David. And you see that word rider, and you're going to see where the tribe, this specific clan, had retreated, and they're going to move from the well to the winepress. We'll see that. So Baanah and Rechab, sons of Rimmon. Now Rimmon means pomegranate, but it also means the harvest is ready, and the harvest is ready for the curse to fall on this family. A man of Benjamin from Beeroth, and Beeroth is counted part of Benjamin. The Beerothites fled to Gittaim and have been sojourners there to this day. They're going to move from the well, a place of refreshing, a place of satisfaction, to the wine press. Now, this is an interesting verse. It seems almost like a parenthesis, but it is proper in the sequence of events. What's happening here is the house of Saul is falling. Saul is dead. The brothers are dead. Abner is dead. Ishbosheth is about to die. In the culture of that day, whoever was part of the outgoing regime is probably going to die. And so they had this grandson of Saul, the son of Jonathan, whom the nurse, he was 5 years old, picks him up, and as they're rushing out, she falls. And Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son that was lame of his feet. I'm having trouble this morning. Pray for me. He was 5 years old when the tidings came of Saul and Benjamin out of Jezreel, and his house nurse took him up and fled. And it came to pass, as she made haste to flee, that he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. We'll be revisiting Mephibosheth a few chapters later in chapter 9. Back to these 2 guys. Now the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, set out and came about the heat of the day, and they came to the house of Ishbosheth as he was taking his noonday rest. I'm going to highlight two words as we go through this little vignette. The one is came, and the other is hand, because the punishment for these two guys is they're going to have their feet and their hands cut off. Sort of reminds me of the little kid's song, "Be careful, little hands, what you do. Be careful, little feet, where you go." Well, that was the message David wanted to give the people when he cut off the hands and the feet of these assassins. So they came to the house as he was taking his nap. It was siesta. And they came into the midst of the house to get wheat. They were faking that they were going to go get some food, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and Baanah, his brother, escaped. When they came into the house, as he lay on his bed in his bedroom, they struck him and put him to death and beheaded him. They took his head and went by the way of the Arabah all night and brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron. And they said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord has avenged my lord, the king, this day on Saul and on his offspring." You know, the Lord gets blamed for lots of things he did not have his hand into. First point. Second point, it seems like a lot of times when we want to validate what we're saying, we use the name Lord, right? The Lord led me as an example. So here they come, and they're not just saying, "Here's this guy's head." They're saying the Lord had something to do with this. But David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, "As the Lord lives." Now, these two guys, they're delivering a head. And the first words they hear out of David are, "As the Lord lives." And this could be good news. He heard the Lord is avenged, and this guy's saying, "As the Lord lives." As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity. Here comes the bad news. When one told me, "Behold, Saul is dead," and thought he was bringing me good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. Now, keep in mind, Amalekite was telling a lie about his role in Saul's death. But David didn't know that. All David knew was that Saul and his two sons were dead, and this guy was the guy who was delivering the news. That's why he died. How much worse when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his own bed. And shall I not now require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth? And David commanded his young men, and they killed them and cut off their hands and feet and hanged them beside the pool at Hebron. Now, hanged is a good word in this context. I do not say I hanged the picture on the wall. I hung the picture on the wall. The only time hanged is a good word is if it's used in an execution. Out in the Wild West, they would lynch people. In the past tense, you would say, "I lynched him" or "I hanged him." It was an execution. That's the only time that word makes sense to us, okay? Which brings us to chapter 5. Neither slope is a straight line. My guess is every one of us will agree that we're not the same person we were the day we were saved. I'd like to think that we're all being saved from the power of sin. We're all maturing as Christians. But I'm not afraid to bet that every one of us has had a rut, a downfall, a backslide, if you will. The same is true on the downslope. Now, when I look across here, I see a lot of faithful Sunday school students. Praise the Lord for that. There's a couple that's not here, Mark and Autumn Weber. I happen to know that they spent their weekend going to Virginia for some kind of family situation. But, you know, Mark is Mr. Faith. He's here every Sunday. He comes every Wednesday to our Bible studies. He comes every Friday to a Bible study I participate in. He goes to other Bible studies that I don't participate in. And he spends all kinds of time studying his Bible, and we swap things that we've seen all the time. He is not going to go from that kind of a snapshot to do nothing for the Lord. Now, I pray he doesn't go down that slippery slope. But if any one of us does go down that slope, we will go down and we'll have a little upwards blimp somewhere along the line. And David is no different than that. We're following the theme, how the mighty have fallen. And yet in that downward decline, you see David, he conquers Jerusalem. We're going to see that. And we see David defeats the Philistines. That's going to be chapter 9 after what we're going to be talking about at chapter 8. Then all the tribes of Israel, plus Benjamin, came to David at Hebron and said, "Behold, we are your bone and flesh. In times past, when Saul was king over us, it was you who led us out and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to you," there are many times when the Lord tells us something, but we don't act on it. And that's the situation here. Here are these 11 tribes. They knew what the Lord had to say, but yet they were enacting a civil war. The Lord said to you, "You shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you will be prince over Israel." I want to also pause on that word prince. We're going to see it again in chapter 7, but I'm going to comment it now because we're definitely not going to chapter 7 today. Prince suggests son of a monarch. Well, David was no son of a monarch. He was a son of a common man named Jesse. He was one of thousands of shepherd boys that God tapped him on the shoulder and said, "You're the one." Every other translation, instead of the word prince right there, will have the word ruler. Now, that's the physical relationship. On a spiritual relationship, we're all kings, or if you will, princes, not princesses. Maybe we've got some princesses in the room, okay? But we're adopted sons of the king. And so in a spiritual sense, prince makes sense. In a physical sense, ruler makes more sense. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed King David over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah, just Judah, 7 years and 6 months. And at Jerusalem, he reigned over all of Israel, all 12 tribes, 33 years. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, "You will not come in here, but the blind and the lame will ward you off." Sounds almost like they were talking to Nehemiah when he was rebuilding the walls. He said, even a fox would knock down the walls if it's tap dancing across these walls. The Jebusites were saying, our blind guys and our deaf guys, they could fight you off. Thinking, David cannot come in here. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is, the city of David. And David said on that day, "Whoever would strike the Jebusites, let them get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind, who are hated by David's soul. And therefore it is said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house." The Jebusites had no part of the promises to Israel. So how did he pull that off? The king didn't do it. 1 Chronicles 11 gives us the answer. "Whoever strikes the Jebusites first shall be chief and commander. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, which makes him David's nephew, went up first, so he became the chief. And David lived in the stronghold and called it the city of David. And David built the city all around the Millo inward." Now, Millo means stronghold, and there's a photograph of that Millo. Basically a vertical wall with buttresses and defenses. And it's around there that he built the city walls. Now, how did Joab pull that off? There you see cave where the water was coming out of Jerusalem, and then this horizontal shaft. And ultimately, Joab, and I'm sure a couple of his soldiers, go up this vertical shaft and then enter into Jerusalem inside the fortifications. And that's how they conquered Jerusalem. And David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. Keep in mind that virtual growth craft, okay? But wait for verse 13. And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David and cedar trees and carpenters and masons, and they built David a house. Now, I don't think they built him a shanty. Kings don't do those kinds of things. He sent some fine craftsmen. And David knew he was anointed when he was a teen. He made his way up through the death of Goliath, 100 foreskins of the Philistines, captain of the armies, on. And it's now to this verse that they said, and David knew. God is calling all of us to do something, to be something bigger than we are right now. Now, this is not an exercise in self-esteem. That's what goes on out in the world. God could be calling you to be less of who you are, not to be confused with Les Hershey. We have to be ready, and many times we don't even know where God is calling us until after we get there. And David knew that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. There's verse 13. Verse 10, he's growing greater and greater because of the Lord. And then we see verse 13. Preceding verse 13 was a slide in our opening comments. He already had 6 wives. He already had 6 kids. And when we covered those scriptures in detail, we said that was not a formula for a happy household. But now he's taking on more concubines, more wives, and these are the names of those who were born to him in Jerusalem. We're not going to go through all those names, but I am going to spell out 2. Nathan, which means rewarded. Notice in the line, he was born before Solomon, which would have meant in the notion of becoming king, he was ahead of Solomon in line, a couple ahead of him, by the way. But Nathan was the rewarded one in that through the bloodline of Nathan came Mary, the mother of Jesus. And Solomon, which means peaceful, out of his bloodline came the stepfather, which would be Joseph. So David defeats the Philistines. I said there were a couple of upticks in his line of spiritual decline. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David. But David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of the Rephaim, the valley of the giants. We read about Goliath of Gath, the giant. But as we continue our study, you're going to read about 4 more giants, his brothers. We're going to step through this map, but I want to make this comment before we do. It's in this round where we hear that David had heard the Philistines had come, and so he proactively does something about it. In the next episode, we're going to find out that David didn't hear the Philistines were coming. Does that mean they were more sneaky? Or does that mean that he is now resting on his laurels, if you will, and not paying attention to what's going on in the kingdom beyond the city of Jerusalem? So he starts in Jerusalem. You see that red line over on the right. He goes to the stronghold. He goes back to the cave of Adullam, and then the Lord delivers them in the valley of the Rephaim, the valley of the giants, right in between. We're going to jump out of sequence, but chronologically, this is what's happening. Chapter 23 talks about David and his last words and the tribute to his mighty men. So the story that we're about to read happens as David is in Adullam. The Philistines are in the valley of Rephaim, including the town of Bethlehem, and some of his soldiers try to do David a favor. David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of Philistines was then at Bethlehem. And David said longingly, "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem that is by the gate." Now, David meant, would that I defeated my enemy and I'd be back in my hometown. But that's not what some of the soldiers heard. Then 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate and carried and brought it to David. But he would not drink it. He poured it out to the Lord and said, "Far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Shall I drink the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives? Therefore, he would not drink it. So here's David and his men. He's in the stronghold. He's in the cave of Adullam. The army of the Philistines are separating him from his capital city. And David inquired of the Lord. In these first few passages that we're talking about with David, from the time he had this wake-up call in Ziklag until now, we read many, many times David inquired of the Lord. In chapter 12, we're going to read about David walking along the wall of his castle, and he looks down and he sees this beautiful lady naked taking a bath next door. We do not read, and David inquired of the Lord, what should I do about that beautiful woman? He did that thing on his own. And David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand? And David, the Lord, said to him, go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand. And David came to Baal-perazim, destruction, because he's going to destroy the Philistines. And David came to the place of destruction, and David defeated them there. And he said, the Lord has broken through my enemies before me like a breaking flood. And therefore the name of that place is called Baal-perazim. And the Philistines left their idols there, and David and his men carried them away. David is a man after God's own heart. But David at this point is not yet fully sold out. When any of the enemies of God's people were defeated, what they were supposed to do was to clean out the garbage, clean out the Balaam, clean out the Ashtaroth poles. And it's not just David allowing his men to bring those idols home. David participated in it. When we get to chapter 6, we're going to find how that turns around to haunt him. In chapter 6, we're going to cover the passage of him bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, and his wife, Michal, his first wife, despises him for the way he was carrying on. And so you have to ask the question, why did she despise him? She was not fully sold out to the Lord, because if you recall 1 Samuel chapter 19, David was being chased by her dad, and he hid an idol in the bed. So she already had them, and for some reason, David allowed them in his house. So the Philistines left their idols there, and David and his men carried them away. David defeats the Philistines again. And the Philistines came up yet again and spread out in the same place. And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, you shall not go up. Go around to their rear and come against them opposite the balsam trees. And when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then rouse yourself. Now, people have tried to come up with, people always try to help God. They're trying to help God by saying, hey, they were there and they were downwind and the army was carrying on and the sound came across and it hit the leaves and blah, blah, blah. That's not what happened. When you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then rouse yourself. Who is doing the marching? For the Lord has gone out before you. There's so much of that fifth dimension that we don't understand. We have length, width, height, time, but there's also a spiritual dimension out there that every once in a while it leaks through. It leaked through for Stephen when he was being stoned. He said, lo, I see the heavens open and the Son of Man and Jesus standing at the right hand of the Father. So somehow the sound of the spiritual armies leaks through into the physical, and he hears them. When you hear the sound of the marching. And then the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines. The same thing happened in terms of the Lord going out before you. That happened with David and Barak. Also happened in 2 Kings chapter 6. We're going to take a look at that. When the servant of the man of God rose early in the morning and went out, behold, an army of horses and chariots was all around the city. And the servant said, alas, my master, what shall we do? Now, who remembers the TV series The Lone Ranger? Okay. The Lone Ranger and Tonto. And this is just like Elisha and his servant. Tonto comes back and says to the Lone Ranger, "We're surrounded." And the Lone Ranger looks out and he says, "Yeah, we're surrounded." And Tonto says, "What you mean we, paleface?" This is a little bit different than that. This is more sanctified, right? "Alas, my master, what shall we do?" He said, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Well, just those two guys. Who was with them? Then Elisha prayed and said, "O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." What a prayer for us. God, open my eyes that I can see. Sometimes we're being pushed and trodden, and it's, oh me, oh my. Open my eyes that I might see. And he said, "I'll never leave you nor forsake you, so that you can boldly say, not be afraid of what man may do unto me." So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Sounds like a good title for a movie. What is faith anyhow? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So David defeats the Philistines again. And David did as the Lord commanded him and struck down the Philistines from Geba to Gezer. So this is what's happening. David is sitting in Jerusalem. The Philistines move back into that valley of Rephaim. David is told, go down and around and behind them, and then wait for the sound of marching in the balsam trees. And he drives them north, and you can see Gezer and Geba up towards the top. Gezer and Geba. And that brings us to chapter 6. Now imagine we're at Beaver Stadium. It's the big football game against Ohio State. Penn State is behind. It's the fourth quarter. They're running out of time, and they're deep in their own territory. What do? You pass, right? Everybody knows something about football. If that's the situation, you pass. Well, Penn State did not do the prescribed things. They go off tackle. The running back breaks through the second line. All of the defenders are playing zone and they're far away. And this running back is going, and the guy on the loudspeaker is going 40, 35, 30, 25, 20. What are 120,000 people in Beaver Stadium doing? They're screaming their heads off. 15, 20, 15, 10. The running back falls. He fumbles the ball, and he doesn't get up. The running back's dead. What is the sound in Beaver Stadium? We would say dead silent, no pun intended. So then comes the next season. The mourning for the football player is done. The stadium is filled once again. And what do? Off tackle, off tackle, off tackle. They make a play. The people cheer. They make sure everybody gets up and goes back into the huddle. They make a play. They give a cheer. They make sure everybody is back into the huddle. Well, that's what chapter 6 is all about. David says the ark should be inside the city, so let's make it happen. Instead of doing things the prescribed way, the pass play, he decides to go off tackle the easy way. And they put the ark on the cart, and Uzzah, which means strength, they must have been traveling through Pennsylvania because the cart hit a pothole. Uzzah steadies the ark by putting his hands on it, and he dies. What were the people doing at that moment? They're all cheering. The ark is coming back. It went from the Exodus. It went to the Philistines when Eli was around. It was parked over there in Shiloh. It hasn't been moved for 75 years, and it's now coming for the final touchdown, and we can become champions. And the running back dies. They put the ark away for 3 months, and then they try again. And just like Penn State, they walk the prescribed way for 6 paces. And they stop. Is everything okay? Sacrifice. They go another 6 paces. They stop. Is everything okay? Sacrifice. And they continue on. So Penn State made its way to Israel. Chapter 6. The ark was brought to Jerusalem, and David was trying to do the right thing, but he was doing it the wrong way. I'm guilty of that. And later on, you're going to see a headline that says, if at first you don't succeed, read the instructions. Well, the instructions is the Bible. And so if we read the instructions, we will not be doing the wrong thing. We will not be doing the right thing the wrong way, but we'll find ourselves doing the right thing the right way. So verse 1, David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, that's the Penn State team, and all the people, that's the 120,000 in Beaver Stadium. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from a point of rejoicing in Judah to bring the ark into the city. And they carried the ark on a new cart and brought it out to the household of Abinadab's, the house of Abinadab's, which was on the hill, and Uzzah and Ahio, they misspelled Ohio, and Uzzah and Ohio State. How'd you like that? You have your firstborn. Say, oh, I'm so proud of that guy. We're going to call him Strength. And then you get another boy, and you're going to call him his brother. Who's that guy? It's his brother. And that's all we know about him. Ahio, that was it. And they were driving the new cart with the ark and Ahio. They went before the ark. It begs the question, how did the ark get on the cart? Did they pick it up like they weren't supposed to? In which case, those guys should have died. Not even the Levites were allowed to touch it. Did God wait so that Uzzah could become a public spectacle, an example? Or did the Levites come with the poles, and we're going to read shortly the right way to do it. Did the Levites come with the poles, lift up the ark, and instead of saying it's a good distance to Jerusalem, we're just going to take a shortcut. We're just going to take a shortcut and put that ark on the cart. We don't know how it happened. We don't know if the Levites were walking alongside the cart holding on to the staffs. We don't know if the staffs were even around. We don't know if they were lying on the cart next to the ark. All we know is they hit a pothole. And David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyrics and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And the Penn State band is going crazy, and they're throwing little cheerleaders in the air. And then the running back dies. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand to the Ark of the Covenant and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there because of the Ark of the Covenant, doing the right thing the wrong way, taking a shortcut when they weren't supposed to take that shortcut. Picture Exodus and the people coming out of Egypt. The Bible tells us it was only an 11-day journey to go from there to Israel, and that would be the shortcut. But God led them a different way. He led them for 40 years a different way. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah, and the place is called Perez Uzzah to this day, the breach of Uzzah, the failure of Uzzah. I don't know about you, but if I was David, I don't know if anger would be my primary emotion. I think I would be, what they say, scared to death. Here's a fine young man, strength, trying to do the right thing, and struck dead. But anyway, David was angry. And David was afraid, angry and afraid. I would have said the other way, afraid and angry. And David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, how can the Ark of the Covenant come to me? He knew it was supposed to be. He knew it was the center of, it was the identity of Israel. You know, one thing leads to another. This is Exodus, where the rules and regulations were prescribed for moving the ark. And you shall make for the ark 4 rings of gold And you know, everything in the tabernacle was a picture of Jesus Christ. The ark was Jesus Christ. And those four holes, he had a pair of wrists and he had a pair of feet and 4 rings of gold, and fastened the rings to the 4 corners of its 4 legs. Close to the frame, the rings shall lie as holders for the poles to carry the table. And you shall make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold, and the table shall be carried with these. Now, in the ark, some of all of the different materials had meaning. The ark was solid gold. There were other things that were wood, humanity, and laden with gold. The poles are also a picture of Jesus Christ. He says, no man can lay down my life. He carried himself to the cross. He could have called down 10,000 angels. But what did they do? They decided to set the poles aside and do it our way, as Frank Sinatra would sing. And when Aaron and his sons had finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, as the camp set out, after the sons of Kohath had come to carry thee, but they must not touch the holy things lest they die. Now, David at this point is already king for more than 7 years. And the book of Deuteronomy prescribed that every king was supposed to write out the Pentateuch. And they're now figuring out that when you're taking notes, if you're taking notes the old-fashioned way, it does something to your brain that makes it stick better. You could be recording the class or the phone call. You could be typing what's happening, but it's not quite the same. David was supposed to have handwritten the law, and he would have had that verse in his brain, but they must not touch the holy things lest they die. So David was not willing to take the ark of the Lord into the city of David, but David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom, the son of Edom. Now, Edom was the nickname for Esau, Jacob's twin brother, but it also means red. It also means earthly. So we're talking about a down-to-earth servant. He was a Levite. He was living in one of the Levitical cities, and that's where they decided they're starting to do things the right way. And the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. We can still be doing the right thing the wrong way. And I'm going to talk about the Lord's Supper. Participate in the Lord's Supper. We're doing the right thing. We're supposed to do that to remember Christ's death until he comes again. But what about the part about self-examination? Let a person examine himself. And when somebody doesn't do that, that is why many of you are weak, sick, or even dead. If I judge myself, I'm escaping a judgment of the Lord. So if at first you don't succeed, read the instructions. So that's what they did. Then David said, no one but the Levites may carry the ark of God, because the Lord chose them to carry the ark and to minister before him forever. It was because of you, Levites. Is this the blame game? We'll find out in the next verse. It was because of you, the Levites, because you did not bring it up. He didn't say it was because I didn't bring it up. He says because you didn't bring it up. It's not the blame game, because you see right here, we did not inquire of the Lord. We didn't ask God how to do it in the prescribed way. It was right there in Scripture. They didn't read their Scripture. They didn't understand what they were supposed to do. Had to pay the price. So the priests and Levites consecrated themselves in order to bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel. And the Levites carried the ark of God with the poles on their shoulders, as Moses had commanded in accordance with the word of God. And it was told to the king, the Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom, that earthly servant, and all that belongs to him because of the ark. So they went and they're going to move that ark again. They're going to stop every 6 steps and make sure everything's okay. And David danced before the Lord. Doesn't say he danced before the people. There were people all around him, but he was dancing before the Lord, not half-heartedly, but with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. A linen ephod is a priestly garment. If you look up pictures on here, you see David dancing in a loincloth, David dancing in whatever. He was dressed modestly, but he wasn't dressed like a king. And that's the key reason Michal tried to despise him. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the Lord. And as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. You see her over on the right-hand side, and she's thinking, just wait till you get home. And they brought the ark, and they set it in its place and inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord, every 6 paces, and also at that final resting place. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and he gave them food to eat. They had a feast for themselves. Then all the people departed, each to his own house. So David had a pretty good day, but he doesn't know what's waiting for him at home. And David returned to bless his own household. But Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how the king of Israel honored himself today. Well, he was dancing before the Lord with all of his might, uncovering himself, not naked, but taking aside the kingly garments, before the eyes of the servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. Now, back in the 1600s, Newton taught us that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And you think about that the next time you go home and one of you says to the other spouse something ugly. More often than not, something ugly is coming right back at you. And that's what's going to happen here. And David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me above your dad. I'm better than your dad. And above all of his house, including you, Michal, to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord. And I will celebrate before the Lord. And I will make myself yet even more contemptible than this in your eyes. And I will be abased in your eyes. But by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. Keep in mind, she was David's first wife. She was given away to somebody else. He brings her back as part of the end of that particular regime. And she comes back to the harem just to be put into the tower, if you will.